or whatever you have to say, that it is a part of life. Whatever we do, it will come, go, it will come, it will go. I think the biggest unfortunate part which I see in society many times, that many of us do not learn from the failure. I mean, if I just talk in the present context, uh, if you see all the developed nations failed, all the health system, you know, in India, where we invested huge amount of money in the private health system, failed from the rejection. And rejection really became a big challenge for me, which I said that, okay, fine, if someone is saying that no, clothing is not an idea, if you want to do something meaningful. So my target in my life, way back in, say, 2 decades back, became that let me make clothing as an idea, as a meaningful thing. So that's a personal thing. And the credit for that goes to my parents, who just gave this beautiful value system, and I am only a keeper of that, and I'm nurturing that, and I'm remembering that. Yes, I enjoy tough time. Yes, and instead of just dying on those houses and buildings, the fact remains that all the big buildings, including religious institutions, all the big offices, all the big cars, are somewhere. And all of us are just surviving on basic dal chawal, which is, unfortunately, the people who made houses for us are homeless, and the people who, because of whom we are sitting inside our home, the rice grower, the dal grower, are in the queue for 100 grams rice. So I think we should take. We never took. The society has really, and this virus especially has really proved that all the big weapons where we invested our money, all the big buildings where we spent our money as nations, as individuals, have no meaning.
So, Anshu, this is very, very interesting. So one, you're giving two instances here. Like one is, of course, you're saying there is something like a institutional societal failure that we're saying. And then, of course, you're talking about some individualized actions and so on and so forth. But let me ask you a question. Who do you think, from a national viewpoint, if I say, or a societal viewpoint, who do you think would be the inspiration for you? And as an individual, who do you think would be the inspiration for you?
I have been saying, I was grown up in cities, okay, and much smaller towns, because my father was in a transferable job, government job, and an extremely honest person. And the honest person in the government job actually go through and see the best possible places in the world, which are the remote places, because the transfer is one of the solution for such. But I would say that I grew up in the city. Last almost more than 2 decades, I personally spent a huge amount of time in the villages of India. And I call villages my university. I call the average person in the village as the most courageous, the best possible manager of the resources, the biggest inspiration in my life. Someone like us who cannot even go to the nearby market walking, those millions of people have actually shown us that in the desperate situation, which shouldn't have happened, but it has happened the way that they can even walk hundreds of kilometers and still survive. We should not celebrate that. We should have a punch on us, because we forced people to do this. It was possible for the people to take care of people. It was possible for people to stop those people and at least make something so that the pregnant ladies don't walk, the elderly people don't walk. So it's a failure of people like me and you, and the entire machinery, 100%. Right? But I still feel that, but those are the people who are inspiration for us. It's very easy to call a farmer unskilled who grow 100 different kind of rice, and it's very easy to call someone who write a paper on them skilled. But that's a wrong notion. It's very easy to call someone who is growing 2 different kind of or 5 different kind of mangoes an unskilled person, and bring that person to the city, force them to become a plumber, and call that person as skilled. I think that's what I'm saying, that this virus has given us a chance, given the society a chance, given the privileged people like us who can sit inside home and still talk on like this to 500 odd people, a chance to relook at the way we have been looking at the society, operating, with the society. This entire norm, Amit, which you must be reading, that 6 states have really passed some resolutions where they're saying that now the workers can work for 70 hours, 72 hours. On one side, people like us are saying that work from home is the best option. We'll work from home. We are giving that fancy name. And on the other side, for the same people who have been walking on the road because of whom we are sitting inside the home, we are saying that you can work 70 hours and 72 hours a week. And the most of the minimum wages law and all are now abolished because we have to keep our economy alive. Why can't the agriculture-based economy really come back? At the end of the day, all the cars were standing, but the rice was moving around.
Yeah.
So that's where we need to see the values.
Absolutely. Very, very well said, Anshu. I can see Tapan. Tapan, sorry for have taken your role for a few minutes in between when we lost you. But handing over the charge of the interaction to you.
Thanks, Amit. Thanks, Amit. There is some technical issue for which I went out. So thank you. I could hear the conversation. Let's look at people with different domains are here. How do they see the post-COVID world? Before I go to the nuts bolts of the post-COVID world, how do you really look at post-COVID world? For example, from a competitiveness point of view, we can answer this question. For example, we know that there is something called a very functional America, and then we have got a very grouped together, cohesive Europe, and we have got these emerging markets coming there. How this rank order is going to change? So let's first look at this side, how this world is going to be in that case, how post-COVID the world is going to evolve. As a general audience, how do you really look at this part?
So, would you want me to answer this question?
Yes, start with you. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So, like this is a very important question in terms of how I really see the world is going to be changing. I think multiple things. Like when you really talk about the way the world was operating, it was fundamentally operating on 4 big things: land, labor, capital. And of course, in the last 10 years, it was about data and information. So if you really look at it, what I see is in this world that fundamentally a lot of things are going to change. One is a very simple system of, say, what you call as resources as land, how resources are actually going to be moving. So when I say resources are going to be moving is in terms of how do we process resources. That means very fundamentally, we are talking about a world where value chains will change. And when I say value chains will change or redefine themselves or supply chain will redefine themselves, I'm also saying in the same breath that we are actually going to be seeing a world which is going to see deglobalization. I see a huge level of deglobalization that is going to happen in the world, wherein we are actually going to be saying, oh, let's be self-reliant as a nation. And what this whole system is exposed in many ways is that you saw this problem in terms of no nation is in a position to actually, get its supply chains to work. We have suddenly got dependent on medical products to one nation or whatever. We need to actually be self-reliant on those sets of things. So healthcare has to be a very strongly self-reliant business that we need to talk about. Today, when you talk about the Indian context, like say even the masks or across the world, masks were not actually available across the world. So how do we really work on those kind of situations? If the pandemic happens, we need to move forward on these things. The second thing that I feel is going to be change. And when I say change in politics, what I'm seeing in change in politics is a very huge rise in populism and authoritarian leaders. And what we are seeing is, this is a precursor. What we are seeing, what we were seeing was rise of like Ergodans of the world and so forth. And those set of leaders are actually going to emerge. In fact, we might see rise of leaders like Trump, who might not be seen as logically correct or whatever, but then we might see a lot of those leaders which are actually going to rise over a period of time. The other thing which is going to be very pointed in this world and which I fear very much, and Anshu did allude to that, and that is going to be rising disparity. So what we're going to see is that there is going to be huge rising disparity between people that we're going to see. The danger is that the rich might actually end up being rich and even more rich over a period of time. And then the disparities between the rich and the poor would actually start getting accentuated. So we will have to really find a model which works in terms of saying that we need to have a much more saner and a just capitalistic system. The capitalistic system of today has not given us the results that we would have actually wanted to. It was one collapse that happened in the last 100 years, and the capitalistic system is just seen to be going bonkers. It's just we do not know how to actually handle it. And last but not the least is going to be how consumers are going to change. So that means consumer behavior will change. I think a lot of people will now realize that they do not need a certain set of products. We were just obsessed with accumulation of products and things. Suddenly, the last 50 days or 60 days has actually taught us it is not about accumulation. It is about life. It is about enjoying life. It is about enjoying a very basic sets of freedom. You might actually have a very swanky car or a very swanky watch, but you're not able to do anything with it. You are sitting at home and you've got stuck. So consumer behavior will change. But the most important thing that we'll have to see is how do we redefine capitalism in this post-COVID world? How do we solve problems of the world? It cannot be the models of capitalistic society that we have actually looked at in the past. And that is what is going to change. And it is a huge change. In fact, the last time when this kind of a thing happened was in 1918, when you had the Spanish flu epidemic. And the world changed. You saw a huge rise of a very interesting capitalistic society. I think we are going to be redefining our societies in the coming few years. We will actually see as to how we will see a huge change in the way people actually interact, to how nations interact, and so on and so forth. It is actually going to be about I feel the world in the next 5 to 10 years is going to see a more humanitarian basis for existence rather than an exploitative basis for existence. I'm hopeful on that. I just hope we do not take that negative path and become absolutely unjust. A very simple example. In fact, a lot of people say, what will happen within the say pharmaceutical field? The pharmaceutical field could be, oh yes, somebody is going to come out with a vaccine for a pharmaceutical, for a COVID-19. Now the question is going to be that should you actually let those enterprises make tons of money on that? Absolutely not. Your capitalistic system will have to be, we protect the rights of humans first. In fact, what has happened in India, right or wrong, I think the choice was between survival of humanity or survival of economy. I think we chose for survival of humanity. Some mistakes have actually happened, what Anshu did allude to. But if we were able to get it right, if you're able to get it right, I think India could be a great example of how things need to be looked at in terms of economies and the way forward.
Thanks, Amit. Mark, there is a specified global order which was established so far, whereby countries have been put into different levels there. But post-COVID, how do you really see this global order changing? And is there a message for India or message for countries, many countries in that way? How do you really foresee that part?
Right. So, Tanda, first of all, I mean, I feel animated and refreshed by the conversation that Amit is making, because it's reflections that I have also had, which will also answer your question, that have to some extent crossed the curve, and they're now starting again. I'm talking about the little bubble between New Zealand and Australia. They start being an interregional hub. I'm talking about what South Korea has been able to do, Taiwan, to some extent Singapore. I mean, really, there has been a clear number of countries that have demonstrated much better capacity to manage this. So the winners are clear. The loser is the old world that was somehow nested around the US and Europe interest, because you also, if you're looking at the global number of people infected and number of people dying, the large majority of them, they come between Europe and the US. And these are some supposedly rich countries. Shows you again, what does it mean to be rich if you can't even take care of your healthcare without necessarily going into this extreme measure like it's currently happening, where we have created this false dichotomy between the economy and public health. So I think we will see the epicenter of the world shifting at a much more significant pace towards Asia. You know, the epicenter had already demographically shifted towards Asia. This is clear. A lot of investment was already going into Asia, and European economies were somehow smaller and shrinking. The US economy was on a steroid for a few months, but many of the jobs that also the Trump administration has built, they were poor jobs or bad jobs, which means jobs that don't necessarily give you the perspective of a life. And so I think this has been a lesson for the West, that the system that we have to some extent dominated for so long was becoming exhausted and incapable of dealing with complex issues. Countries like India, to answer your question, you know, there is a clear understanding of innovation. There's an understanding of grassroots. There's an understanding of frugality and frugal innovation. There's an understanding of jugaad innovation. There's been for many, many years the understanding that community-based solutions, they can work. Now, the problem with this is how do you scale them, and how do you make them now much more sustainable? How do you reconcile the environmental conversation? But these are problems that can be addressed. So I think future of country like the emerging economies, a country like India, is really to start understanding that innovation doesn't have to come with billions of dollars in R&D. You can think about innovating by testing that directly into the market. We have a colleague at the Harvard Business School with Amit who was working with the late Clayton Christensen, who wrote a wonderful book called The Prosperity Paradox. And he mainly said, in the West, we build the process first, and then we're going to bring it into the market. And that has a cost. In the emerging economy, you let the market validate first, and then you build the process around this. Why? Markets are much more intelligent than what happens in an R&D department in any organization. So thinking about reversing the relationship from grassroots onwards rather than top down, I think is where large countries and also large population can truly become a new model. Things have to be taken into account like infrastructure, healthcare, allowing people to have the essential need required to have a life of decency. I mean, these are important conversations to have. But where do I put most of my faith is, of course, in the emerging economies, much more than in the West. I have to say, as a Westerner, I have been very disappointed on how the Western economy have completely mismanaged this because of the lack of interest in collaboration. One thing that I always found extremely visible in this last few days is how big the challenge that we have is and how small our European leaders actually were. And this is actually something that truly hit me. In my understanding that maybe we were under the impression that these are safe places to be. Maybe they are if everything is good. But have you ever noticed that when everything is good, everything is always easy? But you truly test the system when the system is under stress. And clearly this system that we had was not designed for any form of resilience. So that's just a reflection of where I think the world order will go, shifting over to Asia, the emerging economy becoming much more somehow design and architects of the global order. And Europe and the US will have a shrinking role because they also are areas of the world where events like Trump and Brexit have brought nationalism as a form of governance. And go back to what Amit said before, it's the worst possible scenario that we can have, that as we increase inequality, we empower monsters to be elected.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for your view. It gives a very good feeling that we are on the right track. Now I'll come back to the scenario, post-COVID scenario. If you look at, Amit referred about consumer behavior. So if you referred about the way we consume things, whether it is about entertainment, whether it is about education, or whether about product and services, we have always fallen into the community-based consumption. For example, if you go to a village and there is an entertainment, it's a community-based entertainment. When you go to an auditorium, community-based entertainment. The current condition that comes in COVID, is it likely to change? What kind of form and entertainment industry is going to evolve? That's a question for Neil to respond to. How does he foresee the future about his own industry evolving, where there is a question about touch, feel, and being close is being talked about?
Yeah, well, I personally think that it's definitely going to take a hit. I mean, if you've already started seeing that theaters are going to be shut for an indefinite amount of period, So, having said that, the Producers Guild has already started issuing out and maybe also making pointers which are going to be circulated to all the production homes as to how and what the guidelines are going to be as far as handling a set. So right now these questions are so let's put it this way, we don't have definite answers to any of them, because we can always start, we can always have had a plan, but right now unfortunately we can't plan. We have to start multitasking also. So all plans and all future plans that were there are all on a stagnant point. Production wise, if you're going to talk about it, production is going to be very, very difficult. There are going to be a lot of guidelines following a few countries that have opened up filming and shooting. I think Australia has opened up a few places where we are allowed to film. I think they are following a guideline of just a very few members on a set. So most definite, there will be a massive amount of unemployment happening there. Where theater chains, we are talking about, where you are talking about consumers getting into a theater and using that entertainment, I don't think that that's going to open up very soon. The big question is, even if they do open up, we are already in such a panic situation in our state of mind right now. Are we all prepared to go and sit in a theater with so many people, and are we still wanting to? So that is a big question as to, yes, of course, if there is a cure to the COVID, if there is a medicine that happens to be released very soon, I think a lot of panic will kind of settle down. But as far as the production is concerned, as far as entertainment is concerned, it is going to take a lot of time for it to come back to its normal state, because not let's not forget, making a film is a process of almost about 400, 500 people together on a set. So while we are enjoying our OTT platforms at home right now with all the great amount of content that we have, one has to, it will be saturated at some point. So one will have to go back on set and start creating again. But the creative process itself will be on a pause point. Right now, for me, my creativity is happening through my writing right now at home. I can only sit here at home and develop the content that needs to go on floor as soon as the bans are lifted. But the question is that once the ban is lifted, once we are allowed to go back on set, what are those guidelines that the producer guild is forming right now? I think it's going to be strict. Internationally, like I was talking about, I think they've started segregating sets with only a limited amount of people on a set. Now, I also believe what's going to happen is that if I wanted to shoot a feature film, hypothetically abroad, somewhere on an outdoor location, I think what's going to happen is that they are going to make all the crew members go into quarantine for about 14 days and, be settled in one hotel out there for 14 days. Then they are allowed to work on the sets. But when they come back to our country, and when they come back, they are going to be quarantined out here also for 14 days. Now, that cost, who's going to be bearing that cost? If it's going to be the producer who's going to bear that cost, then cost of production is definitely going to go much higher. So the balance is completely off radar out here, because lesser of employees, greater amount of cost of production. Who's going to bear the cost? There's a big question mark out there. So yes, entertainment for that matter is going to be limited to people who are going to entertain you from your homes. I think people are supposed to become smart. We have editors who are, I think the IT guys are going to do fantastically well, because sitting back at home with all the technology that they have, I think that's the need of the hour right now. So I think we as entertainers will also, if you've seen in the recent past on most of your social platforms, we have many of the superstars of the country coming together, singing songs from their homes respectively. I don't know, but maybe there is going to be a certain change in a direction of how you are going to watch the content that's going to come your way. Yes, the kind of production value that we are talking about, the kind of big films that we are talking about, is definitely something that's going to be a lot of concern, because a massive amount of money goes into producing a big film. Hypothetically, a film like mine recently, which I released, was a film called Saho. The cost of production was about 350 crore rupees. But to recover that kind of money, I'm talking about 350 Indian crore rupees. So when I'm talking about that kind of money to be recovered, you need that kind of footfall into a theater. Now, I'm not sure whether whether we can, whether the economy can, whether the productions can afford to really go make that kind of production value films and go straight to OTT, whether they will be recovering that kind of money. So as far as entertainment is concerned, yes, there is a lot of content right now that we have on OTT platforms, but people are slightly fickle. We've been feeding them. It's a demand and supply ratio. Even the platforms really require a lot of content being produced and given to them very fast and very often. Every month, we have platforms like Netflix, Hotstar, Amazon, Z5. All these platforms need content constantly. So even now, for example, right now, I've just finished writing a web series, and I'm discussing the web series to go on floor as soon as the entire ban is lifted. But where we were supposed to shoot the whole series in London. Now we are contemplating of shooting it in India. So, but within India itself, we are not sure where we will be allowed to, the locations that we are going to be allowed to shoot at, and the locations that we're not going to be allowed. So a lot of creativity has also going to be is going to start taking a bend point. So yeah, as far as entertainment is concerned, I think you guys need to all start learning a form of art. Like I said, start writing, start playing a piano, start learning an instrument, and start understanding that entertainment for you is yourself and your family. Yeah, I guess for now.
Thanks, Neil. I will come back to you on your opinion on education, entertainment, edutainment later on. I'll go back to now Anshu. Anshu, there are two firm believers in our panel, including my chairman, who think that equity should be brought in, whether by using technology or by intervening or delivering at a lower cost level, but the gap between the have and have-nots have to come down. Just now, Amit pointed out that the governance structure-wise, you may see more autocrats. Do you foresee that? Because I see the pandemic is so big that the government is almost giving power to the local representatives to manage the show there. Will there be a distribution of power, and that will result in reducing the inequity between the central government and the state governments, or these the authoritative forces and other ones? Do you think that that gap which we have in the society can be solved by more democratized governance, or we'll fall back to what Amit is saying, that there'll be more autocratic governance? What's your viewpoint?
So the answer is that it can be solved by the more democratic process for sure. But the concern is whether that will happen, because I think one of the saddest scene which many of us saw in this particular disaster, that even the police, fine. Uh, I mean, many of them have really done a wonderful job. There's no doubt about it. But when people are walking and you beat them, I don't understand that what was the necessity to beat people who just wanted to go home. Fine. And also because in our case the governance has been an issue. Uh, we 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 have all kind of municipalities and then the panchayats and all, but how many of them are really working well? That's always in a question. So what we see is, again, I'm saying that when we are talking about ourselves, that we have a chance to work from home, but we are also parallel, we are developing laws and rules where we are putting the pressure on the worker category, or those people again, right? So I think something wrong has started happening here. Very simple. The solution is democratization. The solution is more power to the local people. The solution is, uh, I mean, my question is that what are people asking? If you see these millions of people who are stuck here, what are they asking? They're asking for food, basic dal chawal, and they're saying that let us go home. And we are coming back and making rules and saying that no, you cannot go home, because that's how economy will be absolutely flat, because we will not get workforce. How does it operate? I mean, if you are talking about what Tapan, if I answer your question, how will that happen? What do you look for in such cases? Why all of us sitting in this panel are a bit comfortable, because we are just next to our dear ones. So when you are stressed as human being, what do you want? You want that comfort of your home, that comfort, those typical saying that we want to go back home, that at least we want to die there with our, with our people. Does it not really take care of the sentiments of people? Are we just worried about the numbers and the business coming back, or we are saying that it's extremely important that processes have failed, the machines have failed, what we can take care of as the people right now? And if we take care of people, people will come back. The fact remains that if we would have been a bit conscious, bit careful about the people, and we would have made sure that people get food and they do not walk hundreds and thousands of kilometers, and this kind of distress does not happen, and if we would have invested our time, money, energy on people, that's the biggest asset, and those people would have gone home and then come back. But do you think now those people will come back? My answer is no. They should come back? My answer is no. Why should they come back? I mean, why should they come back to again get into the vicious cycle of the exploitation? And I can explain in Indian context, and that context is not only Indian. Okay, we are talking about India, but this virus has also flattened the world. So three things will happen. The first phase is poverty or hunger or starvation. The second phase, which is very important economically for all of us, is the entire debt cycle. Because when you talk about the informal economy, we all know that there is a debt system which goes on where people take 100 rupees at a interest rate of 8 to 15%, and in this that will only go bad. That is the second phase. And the moment you get into that debt cycle of the saukars, of the local people, of the money lenders, you're not able to come back from that. You're always and always there. And this is what has happened. I mean, if 10,000, 12,000 farmers committing suicide on an annual basis in a country like India and many other countries, you can understand why it is happening. And the third, the worst phase, if that happens, that is the absolute distressed migration back in the cities. So we have to really understand people and the future in these three contexts. Immediate need is the hunger and starvation, including the debt cycle and people getting into that so-called informal bad economy in a very bad way. And the third, if we do not take care of the people right now where they've already landed at that particular place, they will be forced to, or the hunger will force them to come back to the cities. And the moment they come back to the cities, a lot of the people who never respected humanity, who never respected people, it is a golden chance for them to exploit further. Let's be very practical about it. Let's not build some hypothesis that suddenly the human nature will change. I mean, the fact remains that none of the World War, not the Bhopal gas tragedy, not such huge incidents of all kind of disasters have been able to change the human behavior, because the privileged people want to keep the privilege intact. So I'm saying this virus, should not affect us physically, but this virus should certainly impact on our thought process. And that should be the power.
Thanks, Anshu. Now I'll go back to Amit. Amit, do you have a different idea on this context, or particularly from the governance point of view, unstepping of various industries? Can you comment on this part? How do you foresee the future?
So, I would rather see this as an opportunity to change. I know, I allude to what Anshu has been saying, that there are going to be challenges. But I think this is the time when we really have to reflect onto ourselves as to what we want to be. What do we want to be as a society? If we don't answer these questions, we are actually going to be talking about a very unjust world. We are not an animal kingdom, right? We cannot let our animalistic instincts come up. We cannot actually say that we are going to be accumulating stuff and so on and so forth. I'll give you an example here. You've had enterprises in India who have actually worked during the COVID crisis, and you've actually had enterprises who exploitative as well. I'll not name the enterprise, but for you to guess, like one of, say, the franchisee-based companies, they are not supporting their franchisee stores. They build their whole brand around the franchisee business, but they're not supporting the franchisee stores. So they leave them to their own vagaries. I don't think this kind of a model in the future will work. You'll have to support your employees. You'll have to find a way to support systems. So what we are seeing is, and from a governance point of view, from a larger, this is the corporate model. So you'll have to move towards more shared value kind of a situation where exploitation is less. But from a management point of view, I think what Anshu was saying is that, okay, these migrants are not going to come back. I'll answer that question in a different way. I think what we are going to see is that people will want to work from locations where they've actually been born and brought up. So you'll have to find solutions, or economic solutions, or economic geography solutions, that people are going to be working from, say, tier 2, tier 3 cities, from their villages. It is time that we have to go back to that Gandhian philosophy, the Gandhian economy model, that you have to make your villages resilient. You will have to make your small cities resilient. Your cities of 50,000, 60,000, 100,000 people, they will have to become more resilient in themselves. Say, will these people come back? I find it very unlikely. They will actually have got disgusted or feel very frustrated at this point in time. But I think we can involve them in the whole economic story in a very uniquely different model. This crisis has told that we can actually find solutions to many problems from various. It's not that everything is closed down. There are some things actually work. There are people who are trying to find some solutions. So for entertainment, as Neil was saying, you will actually have individual entertainers who would actually come up very strongly. You might not see content getting created like films in a very unique way, but you would see some different set of content getting created. In fact, just as an example, my son is a what I call musician, and he's doing his first video, and he's actually having all these people who are performing, one in New York, one in what I call Bombay, and they're actually trying to do that video through video cams in the homes and everything. So there are going to be those unique things which would actually come up over a period of time. I think even say if I really look at it, education for that matter, I think education has always been a what do you call as a supply-driven business. It will transform into a demand-driven business now. The only caveat here is that the professors are the last ones to change. They are the archaic nature because they find it very difficult to change themselves. But the question is, if professors are... Tapan, over to you.
Mark, I have a question for you. Since we are discussing about how the world is going to merge, my question to you is on 3 dimensions: development, conflict, and education. What is your opinion how the world is going to evolve from these 3 points: development, conflict or peace, and education?
Okay. Thanks so much for your question. I think the development part is something that we'll see rising by what we can consider global asymmetries, which is a work that I'm currently trying to curate more and more. And I started to understand, even myself as an economist, that if globalization was trying to get this sense of convergence, the post-COVID-19 will probably be an opposite process, will be a process of devolution. Similar to what both Anshu and Amit said before, there will be much more sense-making on territory, on functional geography. There's an Indian American scholar that you might all know, Parakana, who also talks about the fact that territory will become a much more intelligent form of economic value rather than countries per se. So I think development will see, I think, a paradox between, on one side, nation states becoming more important because nation state will define things like lockdown, public health, borders. And on the other side, we'll see way more regions that will actually be part of the development. So most of the value will be concentrated in regional economics, much more than what we consider national economic or national frameworks. And also, I think one of the challenges we're going to have is how will we make sense of the multilateral organizations now that we do have global problem, but we are trying to address the global problem in local terms. I think we're going to see much more of a form of downsizing of the multilateral organization into regional organizations, like chapters. From the perspective of conflict and peace, I mean, I must believe there will be peace because I think we all have clear evidence that war or conflict does not really bring anything good to us, with the exception that eventually it resets the system. But COVID-19 has been bad enough for us to understand what is resetting the system. So I think rather than conflict, it will be systemic challenges and shocks that will reset systems. And I would hope that somehow even nationalistic governments will understand that the best chance for a government to actually look after their own interests is to work in global terms, which means alliances, working with leaders around the world, because many of the problems the country have are similar problems. If you have a city that does not have clean water, it's not just the city of the problem of that city. It will probably exist elsewhere as well. So I'm hoping that maybe governors or mayors, cities rather than country, will be able to collaborate at a much faster pace. And that degree of collaboration can only happen if you have peace. So peace somehow and collaboration, they tend to go hand in hand. If you want to have an example of that, Panda, right? If you're looking at the least, let's say the least peaceful region right now, it's still the Middle East. And if you're looking at why the Middle East is not as peaceful as other parts of the world, the answer is they don't have a lot of trade and they don't have a lot of shared infrastructure. So somehow that is one of the reasons why it's easier to pick up a fight when you have less in common than when you actually have more in common. And the last part you were asking, Panda, right? Education. I mean, I think we are like Amit, rogue educators. Like we are professors that escape the system somehow. We're still part of the system, but we did not necessarily became standardized to the system. So education is really a key, and it has to become a universal right to the point in which you're allowing people primarily not just to know, because knowledge is important. But I go back to something that I was inspired by both Neil and Anshu, right? It's we have to go back to allowing people becoming what they really want to become. There must be a sense about what it is like to be alive. Is it to be a father, a husband, a son to a elderly father or mother? Is it to be a teacher, an artist, a farmer? I think we lost the ability for us to think about what we want to be. I do remember as I was growing as a child that there was a much more genuine idea about what life is all about. And I guess over time, as we started to be measured in the same efficiency standard that we measure machines, we kind of lost what it's like to be a human. I do imagine you guys in India, you had a quite difficult lockdown. I am currently connecting you from Spain, which is where I was locked down during the period of time. And it was a little bit easier, but equally hard. You know what I miss the most is meeting people and going with people that I care and love. It's not necessarily, I remember the fancy travels or the fancy places. None of this really is what I miss. What I miss is the ability to hug people. I've been thinking and craving about the opportunity to hug people, to spend time with them, to maybe grab a bite together, to talk about life. And I haven't been missing anything else. I haven't been missing driving a nicer car, haven't been missing going in a fancy place, haven't been missing luxury. I've really been missing fundamental things. From the time where Amit and I were going for shopping together in Boston, what I remember about that is how much we were teasing each other. I don't remember none of the things that I mean, he used to buy a lot before he repented and changed himself. But now, what I'm missing those moments. I am meeting you all now, guys. With exception of Amit, I have never met you in person. My biggest regret is that we cannot be in the same room talking about this together. I mean, this is really what defines for me the understanding of what education is allowing people to understand that life is larger than the sum of the parts. And there is something about it that we need to be able to foster as educator, as influencer, as public figures. Because I think all of us in this panel, we share one perks that we have is that we reach out to way more people than more people in general. So how do I use that influencer role? It's really about telling them that if it doesn't generate that fulfillment, then it's not for you. Move on. Redesign your life. And I think last thing I'm going to say, Tana, right? Because you got me started with a beautiful question. Amit said it before. We have a unique opportunity to design the future we want to have right now, because we can't go back to what we had. I mean, unlikely we will have exactly the same design. I think the opportunity right now is to say, how do we envision this? Let's make it happen, but let's make sure that that future has life and humanity at the center of the development, rather than becoming marginal externalities, and which is also one of the reasons why the system before was making so many people poor and trapping in inequality, because it was never thinking of them as people. It was thinking of them as units of production. Anyway, that's my thought.
Can I just ask a question to Mark? Mark, just to elaborate on something that you just spoke.
Yes, Neil.
I just found this really beautiful, the way you said about going and wanting to hug people. So I just wanted to bring up an anecdote, and share a moment of mine. Just a couple of days back, so we've been under lockdown. My society where I stay in India has been under severe lockdown for the last 2 months. And we are taking great precautions because we have a baby at home, like I said. So both my wife and I are paranoid because we don't want to take chances with her. Now,
Right.
having said that, just 3 days ago, our society eased it down slightly for us, and we were allowed to go out and walk on a lobby level, but we had to maintain a certain distance. Now, normally I would go and meet my members of my society who are my family with that hug, with that warmth. Now, I'm only afraid, is this going to be the new social uh, approach that we have for people? Is it going to be the panic that we are going to create amongst ourselves for how we are going to meet people? I think Anshu and both Amit, all can answer
Mhm.
this also, because this suddenly got me thinking about, uh, though I agree, I'm staying very far from my father and from my mother. They're back in town, so we're staying separately because my father's 70 years
Mhm.
old, and we were medically advised to keep the baby and my father separate. So I decided that my daughter and I stay in one of our homes out here. My father continues
Yeah.
to staying there. I am extremely emotional a man, and I'm very, very,
Mhm.
emotional about my father. We
Mhm.
unfortunately had a loss in the family during this period, and we weren't Mr. Rishi Kapoor, one of the biggest icons in the Hindi film industry. He passed away in this pandemic, and even Mr. Irfan Khan. And unfortunately, we couldn't go for the last rites also. So
Mhm.
now, when a situation like this happens, and suddenly this ban is lifted and we are allowed to meet people, how is it going to actually affect our mental state of approaching people? Am I still going to
Mhm.
allow those multiple people coming back to my production office? Am I going to be going and hugging people, or am I actually going to be somewhere I will have that panic that has been or mentally been created in me? I might have an OCD issue, for example,
Right.
but I might,
Right.
go out there and say that, hey, hi, what's up? How's it going? But maintain that 6 feet difference, between us. So how's that going to affect relations? Is what I want to ask all of us out here.
Yeah, I think I'll add
Well,
one more
maybe because
question.
my
I'll add one more
yes,
question to
Tapan.
this.
Sorry. Yeah.
There is a question from UK, a friend of mine who's a professor in University of Sheffield, Sunil Sahdev's question. The fear, which was an individual fear, has become a mass fear now. Even if you are traveling in a bus, you are taking your kid to drop to the school, you're going to meet
Exactly.
somebody, this fear is everywhere. So that's the opinion, that's a comment you should give us. How are you going to handle this fear which is coming there, which is of course going to impact us the way we govern our schools, we manage our schools, we design our classrooms, we design our buses. How we are going to handle, because of COVID, this fear, the mass fear which has evolved in this case, is also a question from Sunil Sadev. So if you'd like to respond to this. Amit, would you like to start?
Yeah, sure. So Tapan, this is a very important peg of the conversation in terms of like how things would actually happen. Like humans by nature are very resilient, and we would always want to overcome the crisis that actually happens. In fact, this is not the first time it has happened. It has happened way back in the past. It has happened at least 3 times in the last 400-500 years that pandemics have actually hit us. We do change certain levels of our behavior at that point in time because the fear psychosis stays. But over a period of time, there are two things. One is either that each one of us would actually become resilient to this disease or whatever we are calling as herd immunity. But the second, I think, more important is going to be that once the vaccination is there, I think this fear goes out of the window anyways. It is like this, like TB was seen as a very massively bad disease about 60, 70 years back. Today, we don't even bother about it. We don't if there's somebody who has a TB, we understand it's a bacterial infection. We are able to beat people. So that's the same thing with COVID as well. I think right now we have a lot of, we don't have adequate information about the disease. We do not know how this whole transmission is going to happen. I think once the whole disease is over, in terms of what do you call vaccination being found, this should solve. And I hope that we do not make it as into the bigger thing that is happening here is that we see that this is becoming more like a class-based issue as well. We should not really go into that kind of domain. Like we have seen it across the world. It seems that it is being driven as a new caste system or whatever, or a new bifurcation of society. No, we should not really look at it this way. Like at the end of the day, humans are alike. We need physical connect, and that should actually come back, and that would come back. It is just a temporary phase. I think it will last for a few months, but eventually, I think we will all go ahead. Or else, at some point in time, we'll all get frustrated and say, "Just chuck it, yeah. I need people. We'll start traveling or whatever." But in some time, it would start happening, and that's going to happen. Like, in fact, how long do you think when Neil says that he misses his father, he wants to meet his father? how long do you think you can actually sustain that? In fact, my parents live 300 kilometers away from where I am, but how long do you think we will say that we don't want to meet? But at the end of the day, once we know how to take precautions, we have the vaccine, we'll actually go full hog into the front. Right now, what is happening is, I think, is trying to flatten the curve, reduce the curve. I think, and that's where it is, and more of fear of the unknown. So overcome the fear of the unknown, and that is what the world is going to be like. And then, of course, in invoking one of the actors from what I call Bollywood, I dislike him as an actor. That's a clarification here. But Dar ke aage jeet hai, and that is Salman Khan, the worst of all times. But that's a separate issue.
Also, will you like to respond to this question? Your
Yes.
views. How do we handle this mass fear?
No, so it's a very complicated thing, Mark and Neil, the way you touched upon, because I am also known for my hugs, okay, and I cannot survive without that, and I'm actually getting a large number of messages from my team and the youngsters and all. Yes, I'm missing your hug, bhaiya, missing your hug. Right? It's a complicated thing. Uh, Also, I think I agree with Amit that this is ultimately a health disaster. Also, the outcome is totally different. Fine, but disaster was a health disaster. Disaster is a health disaster. And the moment we find a vaccine or a solution, I'm pretty sure that things will come back. And I'm hoping that things will come back in a much bigger way, because there will be a deficit or a quota which we have not done. So I think I'll hug twice instead of once, or maybe thrice instead of once, because for 1 year or for few months I've not done that. The other important part is that also I believe, and this is what we have been saying, that the term social distancing is actually a wrong term. Okay, this is what I because this is basically what we're looking at is not the social distancing. Rather, socially we need to be more connected, stand with each other, fine, and be with each other. There has to be a feeling of fellow citizen. What we're looking at is just a physical distancing. So I think it is a time that we start changing this to physical distancing, because that's the need of the hour, not the social distancing. I mean, in this panel we might be sitting at 5 different places, but we need to feel connected. We need to really, and now this disaster has actually given us a chance to be connected socially much more, because we are literally sitting at home in our own whatever. We can connect better, we can call people, we can talk to people, which in our so-called busy life we were hardly doing. So I am pretty sure that it will come back. But most important part, again, I'm going back what I was talking about, the migrant laborers, that what are they looking for? They're looking for someone, their parents, their mother, father, their kids. So this is not a disaster where we should only talk about the economy, the process, the numbers. This is also the disaster where we need to talk a lot about emotions, about humanity, about human beings, about relationships. I think then only we'll be able to really come back much faster, because when the lockdown opens up, lockdown for large number of people is just a date, but lockdown in the millions of life and people like us, to me, lockdown is till the time I am able to hug someone. To someone, lockdown is till the time that the person really comes back to his or her job and start earning. Lockdown is not a date for us. So it's extremely important, and that's why in our team, in our relationships, we are trying to keep a lot of things intact. We have even started a Goon channel, for our larger team of 1,000+ people all across the country, so that instead of going to these useless, many of these useless TV channels and only knowing the distress, they also get into some good kind of content, which makes them happy, where they laugh at least once in a day, if nothing more.
Mark, do you have any point to add into this conversation? Your views about handling the mass fear?
Yes. So I agree actually with what both Amit and Anshu has said, in the sense that there will be somehow a moment where we'll go back to some form of normalcy. But also let me use some of the historical references for you to put it in context. We have never really found a vaccine for tuberculosis. We have one that we give to kids, that is reducing by 20% the chances. But we kind of been able to cohabit with this. We have been having a lot of viruses that we somehow were able to extirpate or eradicate or control. This was simply more of a global crisis in the way it was managed globally for the first time, because if you remember the swine flu, this was over 200,000 people who died, but because they were regionally dying, then it's like the world did not really care too much. And we forget that there are hundreds of viruses in Africa, and the reason why they don't come to our places is because Africa is not as connected as China is. So I think we have not necessarily to think of the virus as an apocalyptic scenario. It's more about the question, what are we learning as a society that we're really going to make sure that in the next wave of crisis, be this a virus or something else, we'll be able to respond without necessarily excluding the weakest member of our society. Because one of the things that I guess this coronavirus has done, beside the mental health issue, which is an important part because many people have somehow gone through a different kind of distress, but who has been mostly exposed to this are the people that are already the weakest of society. And I guess that's really where we have to think about response mechanism for the next one. But I too tend to agree, we'll eventually go back to some form of normalcy. Yes, we talk about post-COVID-19 because very likely some form of precaution will be in place. If you remember after 9/11, that changed for good the way we fly. But it didn't necessarily stop us from flying. It just changed the way for us to go through the experience of flying. If you're looking at some public offices in somewhere in the world where you're having a plexiglass, that happened as a reflex of 1950, 1955 smallpox that lasted for a few years and then was eradicated. So yeah, a few things will stay. But I think that, as was said before, we're too much of social animals to be deprived from the most important things. I mean, if there is one thing we understood during this pandemic is really what being a person is, what is really that move us. The first thing we're going to do is to try to establish again those bonds. And I also agree with what Anshu said. We call it social distancing. It's for the time being, it's a physical distancing. It shouldn't be called social. It should be a physical distancing. And then it doesn't necessarily change that we cannot have compassion in this period of time. But eventually, we'll go back to a sense in which the value of what we look for will be higher than the risk of thinking about getting a virus. I'm going to give you an example, the last one. So I was having actually a routine medical check in these days, and I was asking the doctor, I said, what was the number of people who died in Spain of flu last year? Because I know this conversation about flu and COVID-19 is going on, and I know it's been mismanaged because the issue was COVID-19 is much more multiplicative and it's the very beginning of the transmission, eventually will decrease. But she said in the same period of time in which we've been in lockdown last year, about 15,000 people died of flu. And if you're looking at the number of people who died of flu in Spain, it's close to 25,000, right? Now it's probably more. But it shows you, yes, it's a much more deadly virus at first, but eventually transmission will decrease and it will become a virus like other viruses that we have, which has not necessarily prevented us from having a social engagement. I think for me, and I finish with this, COVID-19 is not more about the public health, it's the institutional response to it that for me really matters. Because otherwise, it means that no matter we have a bit of a stronger crisis, if that is strong enough to pull us off, right, then the problem is not the crisis, is that institution that we had before was not strong enough to undergo any form of shocks.
Thanks, Mark. I have my last question, that personal to all of you. Everybody knows that Neil is a very adorable father. Internet has all those videos of him dancing with his daughter. All of you are nice fathers there. So my last question to all of you is, how do you really see your children's future in a school? What kind of school that you are looking at for your children? What kind of future we want to leave back to our next generation? Neil, to start with.
Because I leave that decision to my father-in-law and to my mother-in-law. Luckily, my father-in-law is right here amongst us and is listening to this conversation. So I'm going to leave that decision to them. As far as education I concern, both my families, my sister is married into an educated family and educational background. So, my brother-in-law is an educationist. My father-in-law, my mother-in-law, both are educationists. So I leave that topic of discussion for them to decide. I think they're best judges. Only a couple of pointers what I think are important for me to just probably point out right now in general, maybe not completely related to the question itself, but in general, is I think some pointers that I think one needs to understand that are important is that health is wealth. What probably have, these are things that have probably come out with the situation that we are in, that health definitely is wealth, that money cannot buy happiness. So there's definitely, like Dr. Amit, Dr. Mark, and both Anshu and everyone out here on the panel have been discussing this earlier also, that I heard about Mark and discussing about how Amit and he went shopping. I guess that happiness is going to get a completely new definition right now. It's not going to be more of going into shops. I think live in the present moment, because like I said earlier, that yesterday is history, tomorrow is a mystery, today is a gift. That's why it's called present. So I guess we'll all be living in for the moment. Of course, there's going to be a huge difference between ambition and priority. So how much ever we are going to be ambitious, how much ever we are going to be working towards that, I hope that definitely does come back to normalcy the moment we have a vaccination, and we have that. And like Mark earlier pointed out, that we are, humans are quite the social animals. So we are going to be very ambitious and back on that train to earn success. But I guess that there is going to be some kind of priority and a reality check constantly happening. And of course, I think stop planning and start multitasking is something that I think education needs to also incorporate. So that's coming back to your question. I think we need to educate our students to a greater level of multitasking. Maybe multiple vocations is also very important for us to understand that right now that's the need of the hour, maybe in the future as well. Yeah.
Thanks, Neil. Amit, will you like to add 1-2 lines, each one of you, so that we can conclude this?
So in terms of education, I think I would like to see a system where students start appreciating the power of reading. I think one thing which we actually lost in the last few years is because of devices like this, and this being in hands of the students, that they just went onto the internet and they're just getting obsessed with it. I hope they understand that there is this whole beauty of reading and they're able to actually look at it. And the second thing is going to be that we have to look at education as an experience, as a learning mechanism, not as a job-seeking mechanism. I think a lot of us have actually started looking at what I call education as job-seeking thing, rather than actually saying that it is about learning. So let's look at learning as the process, not anything else. Jobs or whatever will happen. And the third thing, which I must say, all people who are getting educated should say, we are not there to seek jobs. We are actually there to actually learn and contribute to society, make enterprises. In fact, I would always say that, within, when you talk about the IIMs or the IITs or whatever, they are not placement agencies. They should be seen as places of learning. I think what we have done is a lot of people have relegated them to as places of what I call placement agencies. Go beyond, make them as places of learning, and that is what we should look at. It's about learning, reading, writing. That is what we should actually come back to and increase our aptitude over a period of time. And hopefully we are able to shun this stupid device.
Thanks, Amit. I'll go to Mark now. Mark, your last 2 points.
Yes. So I think around education, I guess education should be measured by those that are included, not that are those that get excluded. And we have been an education model that truly excluded a lot of people, marginalized it, and we also created this economic idols in which if you were studying certain kind of educational backgrounds, you would be more successful than others. And we have alienated millions of kids that never really were able to become who they really want to become, right? By thinking this is what you should do because that will give you a career. As we get into the point in which education and employability are no longer guaranteed, I think we should really get people to become who they really want to become and use education as a way to empower them, to give them communication skills. to give them the chance or the confidence to ask important question and not to be afraid of making decision and thinking that the future is somehow what we make of it rather than something that's out there waiting for us. I read, and this day I've been reading a lot of people work because somehow it provides me a bit of comfort. And there's a professor that I follow that I find it very illuminating, who said, if you stay in the present long enough, the future will appear. And I really think that's really what is important, right? And I'd like to finish with this. I wish to all of those that decided to join us today to be able to embrace the future long enough to the point in which we are going to be able to understand the present, as we currently have it. And the more we're going to be in the present, the quicker actually the future will appear. And I have also learned a lot from the interaction with everyone today.
Thanks, Mark. I'll now go to Anshu for his final comments.
So, one way to deal with this disaster, I would say, is make a list, all of us as society, and on one page we just write that what we created, it didn't work. And on the other page we say what is that which we ignored. And I can tell you that what we created didn't work much is also the education system, what we have created. I mean, especially in a country like India, where we call private schools public school, there is something fundamentally wrong. We have been creating managers. We have been ignoring the people. We have been ignoring 70% of our population, and the management institution also take them as customers, nothing else, not as fellow human being. Right? So there is something absolutely fundamentally gone wrong. I'm again coming back that all the big businesses, so this is good that this virus has affected a lot of us and have forced us to be confined inside home, so that we really challenge what we have created ourselves. Do we really want more managers coming from the management institutions and talking about money, and money becomes a target, or we also talk about the fellow human being and the value system and all that? So that is what certainly needs to really change. This education system had to collapse for sure, and I'm just hoping that a part value system will come. To be honest, and colleges have started doing this e-teaching starting at 7 o'clock in the morning, and again doing all kind of lessons. So they are not improving; they are still pushing the same kind of curriculum, doing the same stuff. There was a time just before COVID, there were these experts where a lot of people were going and paying them for the de-addiction of the tech, de-addiction of the mobile and laptop. And we, the people, people like us, me, Neil, whole lot of us have grown in an atmosphere where we used to have more outdoor and less indoors. And that's how we have really learned. I know that this disaster will stop that for some time, but it's extremely important for people to move out of this laptop and mobile and learning out of that and become better human being to start with, then the manager of certain funds or consultancies and all that, because whole lot of that has collapsed. Let's accept that. Period.
Thanks, Anshu. Our debate of management schools and how they govern will continue, and we hope we'll find out a more socially responsible model. Maybe I'll request our chairman to speak few words before I close the session.
Yeah, so I guess everybody's expressed a lot of thoughts, and these definitely are uncertain times. But being the eternal optimist that I am, I think things will turn out for the better. This is nature's way of balancing things out. I would agree with certain comments. I would have a different opinion. I would agree with a comment like there is going to be a lot of deglobalization. There is going to be a lot of decentralization. But I don't agree that there will be an increase in disparity. In fact, I feel there will be a far more democratization. When Anshu was worried about how a lot of his work has been negated because of this episode and how the imbalance will increase further. I think I honestly believe that this is nature's way of balancing things out. A lot of communities will be developing, self-sufficient communities will be developing. Yeah, so I definitely look at all of this in a far more positive manner. There have been typically, I mean, just because I'm familiar, I'll again repeat it what I mentioned in the earlier, and I believe that could be a solution for a lot of things, is that education moving online such that it could be a continuous process. And people evolve, people grow with it, people can continue educating themselves. There was a lot of resistance in the system from all the stakeholders. And now with this situation, I think that resistance has disappeared overnight. In fact, the situation I feel will be a catalyst to develop all of that. So yeah, being the eternal optimist, yes, it's going to be different, but I think we should be looking at this positively and something coming good out of it. I think the first topic that you started with respect to challenges and failures. Honestly, I think failure is just a perspective. I personally have come across a lot of challenges, and I think when you have overcome them and you look at it, net, you never end up being a failure. It's never a loss. There is always some damage caused. There is always something that one has gained. So at the end of it, you always come out a winner as long as you go through that. So thank you everybody for spending time, sparing the time, and yeah, extremely enriching. And I think we should look forward to a far better tomorrow.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you, sir, for your time and your experience sharing. Everybody have observed that how acutely we are watching what conversations we are having, and you are giving your views. I think overall I have done a very safe job because I didn't give any opinion. I was just managing this. So, but it was a chance to learn from many of you. So I hope there are some good lessons to learn from these conversations we have at individual level, at organization level, and also country. But finally, all of you have looked up to the world in a positive way. All of you have looked into more closeness, not in the form of a physical hug, but some other way of having this closeness. All of you have looked up to living a life to the fullest. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time, for joining these sessions. And all of you are preoccupied with your work, and I tried to catch you up in a very short notice. Thank you all. Thank you, Amit, especially for putting in touch with Mark on that part of it. I'd also like to thank Kavita ma'am for helping me out to catch Neil so that Neil can join this panel. I have a right with Anshu. He always jump up to Anshu for help, and he has always obliged. Thank you, Anshu, for our friendship. Thank you, Chairman sir, for your time for these conversations. I'd also like to thank all the members who have joined across the country. Members, I think we had 1,700 registrations, but I could manage only 1,000 people because I have only 1,000 people here. I just want to announce that we'll take this conversation forward every week. And next week, I'm going to answer the question which I asked to Neil, that when a toddler goes to the school and what kind of fears parents have and how we are going to handle this part. It's a multi-continent program that I have for the next week where we have an expert from Australia, expert from Africa, and a couple of experts from India joining with us. I'll keep you posted about these conversations. If you have any views, please let me know so that I can ask, as a moderator, I can ask these questions. And I also request all the members who have listened to this program in the webinar to join back and let's explore newer things. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Such a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Summarize it, I think it's not social distancing, it's physical distancing, right? Thank you, guys.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm glad that you all said that. Thank you, Anshu. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys.
Bye, guys.